So now is our opportunity to reclaim the agricultural narrative within Australia. I'm a Worimi man. I live and work on country. I'm a bug family descendant, and I want to begin by acknowledging country and paying my deepest respects to elders from these lands, both past and present. I share that I'm a bug family descendant because I want to be very clear that these are stories that are told to me that I hold as true. The yarns that I hold dear from my Auntie Norma, who tells me some beautiful long stories and yarns about her life and traditions, to those that I read in the archives that are owned by the Australian National University that share some of the yarns about our people and our involvement. So our country, just to give you a sense as to where it is, Worimi Country for me, as part of my truths, go from almost Newcastle in the south, all the way up to Foster Tuncurry in the north and out to the ancient Gondwana rainforest of the Barrington Tops. And 200 years ago, 1 million acres of our land was handed to the Australian Agricultural Company, a company that is the longest standing company still in Australia today, a company that you can buy and trade shares on the stock exchange. A company that, after getting 1 million acres of our land, decided it was no good for agriculture, for the sheep country that they wanted it as, and decided to sell up, pack up, and move, leaving our family and our people behind on that journey. So I want to start by talking about country. I paint that map of where our country is to tell you that it's not very good sheep country. And in fact, when AACO got their first 1 million acres from the federal government, they got that because they were able to raise £1 million for their farming operations. That £1 million came from very wealthy investors, all from overseas. And the federal government's matching of that in kind of a crooked, hefty balance set of saying, here's 1 million acres of country, was something quite powerful back then. It's quite strange for me to reflect on the company being able to raise £1 million in 1824. But that's exactly what they did. They got permission to take on this land. And the journal articles that share the stories of our country are kept because of the company structure that they were formed under. Robert Dawson was the first agent, the chief agent of the Australian Agricultural Company in 1824. And he rocked up on Worimi Country after a series of boat rides to set up their farming operations. And his journals are all collected in those archives down in Canberra. On the night that he first arrived, he said in his journal article on the bottom of the first page, before writing about the sheep or the landscape or the people that he brought with them, he said, should the Worimi people not cause us any issues, we should make sure that we work with them on this country and do our best to support their farming, or their efforts on this land. We know that relationship was broken very quickly. And while Dawson was venturing along this path on Worimi Country, he talks about a country that's very foreign to me now. He talks about grasslands being waist high, roaming his way through it. He talks of kangaroos bouncing around with emus chasing after them. And he talks, when he gets to a place called Gloucester, where I live today, of how it reminds him of home. How it reminds him of the place where he grew up. And looking out to the mountain ranges around, he refers to them as castles and reminds him of that little inkling of these decrepit castles crumbling down that share with him that reflection, to hence call it Gloucester. So our country doesn't look like that anymore. This photo here shows a very different landscape to the one that you can imagine him describing. And in fact, other so-called explorers, when they came through our landscape, were able to grab tufts of grass from either side of sitting in the saddle and crossing over them and almost tie it up. That's how tall our grasslands were. And now it's the home of kikuyu, this really short little grass Good for cattle, but not much else. And certainly doesn't reflect those long, tall grasses that our country needs. We also know that Dawson's relationship fractured very quickly with our families. So the image on your left shows a map of the Worimi estate that they got given, the 1 million acres. And on the right, just 4 years after getting that 1 million acre grant, there's a line item in there, the one down the second last from the bottom, that says allowances to native blacks for services rendered in the provision of tobacco, flour, and maize. And next to that, there's a line item of £100, which might seem like a bit, but when you look at the rest of the record book, it's a seventh of what they spent on feeding their horses that year. So despite our mob taking them on this journey, protecting them, teaching them about important sites and country, just a seventh of what they fed to their horses is what was allocated back to our mob. And in fact, that relationship was quite challenged. Despite seeing the impacts of not burning country just 10 years after taking on the land, Dawson reflects that mob were trying hard to try and eat at that period of time. And in fact, our people are known to have got to a certain station and have killed cattle because of the drought, only to be massacred as a result. It's these kind of truths in agriculture that often we don't talk about. It's an industry that we fantasize about, actually. We have this really romantic love story about the way in which agriculture looks in Australia. You would have all heard narratives of riding on the sheep's back, the yarn about the way in which we have farmers connecting to country of so many generations. This real love affair of wool and cattle, the way that pastoralists worked across this landscape. And all of that challenges the rhetoric of what truly happened here in Australia. But there's signs of hope. Almost 200 years on now, from when AACO first got given that initial land grant, our family's finally been able to meet with them. We've finally been able to, as equals, come to them and have a conversation over a meal as one. We've been able to rummage through the archives and find more and more stories around what these types of agriculture could look like on lands where agriculture first colonised the landscape. And I make no mistakes of saying that agriculture is a colonising act. The very notion of what Western agriculture was to rock up on a piece of land, plough around the outside, make some marks in a tree, get rid of any pests and native animals, which at that time included our people. And that signified ownership for them to be able to take over landscapes. So now, almost 200 years on, we've been able to tell our truths, tell the stories that matter to us from our perspective and our knowledge of what truly happened. And by doing this, we're able to reflect on what the true agricultural story of our landscape should be. I often say that our land is the most colonised landscape due to agriculture. 200 years on, the agricultural practices that they started back then very much match what we see now. Farming practices that take from the land, challenge the way in which our water systems work, and while we don't also have the diversity of agricultural commodities on top of the landscape, we don't have the diversity of people being engaged in it. So we need to challenge about how we think about agriculture, the way in which we farm, what we farm, and how we farm. And I show this image. It's a drawing done by one of the future chief agents of the AACO in 1842. And you might be able to see the little description down there that says, "The feast given to blacks, Christmas, 1842. By being able to have these conversations and come to these stories as one, we've been able to investigate what our connection to country could look like from now into the future. And you might be able to notice in this image that was drawn by Sir Philip Parker King that we have mobs standing, and you'll see a guy on the left-hand side wearing headdress, which is really strange for us on Worimi Country. And just this week, we've sent a bunch of our mob up here to learn how to make headdress so we can bring that back to country, a practice that probably hasn't been done for 150 years. So we can celebrate with our youth around what this might look like for now and into the future. For me, that's a really exciting opportunity. And if we can get that right, there's no bounds around what other practices we might be able to think of, really embedding new agricultural and cultural practices back on land. So for me, the dream is quite simple. The ability to farm our land in a sustainable sense. One where I can imagine cows roaming on rich native pastures with kangaroo grass flowing at their hocks near the nearby rivers, country that has been burnt again because we know that while our country was being burnt 200 years ago, that practice stopped after 10 years. The AACO reflected in that 10-year period that maybe the Indigenous people knew something about this landscape. Those constant bushfires that were once and had kept burning that seemingly stopped might have been able to do something to country. So we want to revitalise some of these practices, share our truths around what the conversation could look like. And ultimately, for me, the main goal is to use agriculture as a way in thinking about all of our sectors. Because if we can get it right in agriculture, a sector that is a colonising act, then we can get it right anywhere. And for me, the real vision is this. We don't have an agricultural system, an Australian agricultural system. What we have is 60,000 years of Indigenous people farming, 200 years of colonisation, and taking as many different agricultural ideas from across the world as what we can and throwing and seeing what sticks here in this country to get to this point to where we are now. And if we truly appreciate all of that history, if we really take on the yarn that our mob were the first farmers here and that our practices interwove through livestock farming particularly, and particularly up here in the north, then we actually come with a much richer and broader narrative. And my hope is that by combining all that, showing that our practices helped inform livestock farming as we know it now, then what we will be able to do is develop an agricultural narrative, one that is truly Australian, that recognises the last 60,000 years of our practices and informs what we might do for the next 60,000 years into the future. So for me, quite simply, if we can get that right, if we can get the yarns right and the narratives right, if we allow truth-telling and understanding of what happened on this place, what we will get is a truly Australian agricultural yarn, one that we can all be proud of.